I remember when I was young, I was, the Miss Universe and Miss America pageants were always on television. I was always fascinated by the interviews that they would do with these young ladies who were hoping to become Miss America or Miss Universe. And they would ask them a question such as this: what do you want to do? What great aspirations do you have? And inevitably, the answers would begin something like this: well, I want to solve world hunger, or I want to help the homeless.
World peace.
World peace, yes. And I never heard any of these young ladies say, I want to be a high finance banker because I want to be a power broker in the world. And I found that really interesting, that these people that would have a rather prominent place, obviously, in either America or in the world, if they won this prestigious position, they wanted to use their position to actually make a difference in the world. And that's really the title of my message today, is to make a difference. God has given each of us many gifts, and I'm not talking about the gifts of the Spirit. The gifts of the Spirit are wonderful. God gives them as He wills. The gifts of the Spirit are most often for the purpose of evangelism, or at least bringing the kingdom into the world. But the gifts that I'm talking about here today are the gifts and talents and abilities that God has given to each and every one of us. And we are on this earth to use our giftings, our talents, our abilities to bless God and to be a blessing to each other. That's why we have these giftings. How many of you are blessed with Adrian's piano playing? Yes. Yeah. And other people singing. We're blessed by singing. And someone playing the trumpet over here, I don't know. Or saxophone, whatever it was. But God has given each of us these giftings to to honor God and to bless each other. And in being a blessing to each other is one of the ways that God intends for us, believe it or not, to make a living. God gave you giftings and abilities to bless other people, and in that blessing, it's a way that God can bring income into your life to be a blessing to you. I've often looked at people who have trudged off to a job for 40 years that they hated, only to get a paycheck. And I think to myself, what misery they must live in all week long. And God has given every single one of us talents, abilities, giftings, so that we can bring a blessing to God, bring a blessing to each other, and also actually make a living. I had a friend who's now with the Lord. He was the excavator that helped excavate our building here and did all the groundwork, and he was a 20-some-year friend of mine. And we had the privilege of doing his memorial 3 years ago. But he used to say this. He said, Brian, if you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. If you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. What do you love to do? God's made you to love what you do. God's made you with giftings and abilities to actually make a difference. Sometimes people have asked me, how do you actually serve others, or how do you actually make a difference in the world? I'm going to give you 5 ways today that we can make a difference. And the first is this: be the real you. Be the real you. Don't try and be somebody else. Don't try and be somebody that you're not. You know what? I married Jackie because I loved how she was. But I would be really bad at being how she is. You get what I'm saying?
I'm not sure I do.
Well, we'll be married 50 years next year, so maybe by then you'll get
I
it.
think I get it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I really do get it.
Yeah. So here's me. I want to walk into a room of 100 people, find one person to talk to for 3 hours. That's me. Jackie wants to walk into a room of 100 people and make sure everybody is happy. That's
I
true.
want to enjoy everyone.
Yeah. And we're different. And one of the things that you need to do to make a difference is actually be the real you, because that's how God made you. Now, there's strong points and weak points to our personalities. There's no question about it. And you need to minimize the weak points and really accentuate the strong points. But don't try to become something that you're not. If you discover what giftings you've been given and how to use those gifts to help other people, you will make a positive difference in this world. You will automatically make a positive difference. You will make the difference, listen to this, you will make the difference that you were born to make.
Hey, Brian, I did go through a time where I tried to be more demure and
What's
quiet.
that mean? What's that mean?
Well, just cool.
Cool or quiet?
Quiet, cool, just quiet.
Jackie and...
Quieter. I did try to just calm down, and I was so miserable.
Yeah, Jackie and quiet do not go in the same sentence.
Yeah.
You know.
Because I would get embarrassed after church. I'd go, "Why did I say that?
Why did
I was too." I'd say to Brian, "I'm changing."
I said, God made you like
I
this.
forget. I'm done with that.
Yeah, just be you.
This world needs who you were made to be.
That's right. And when you are who you were made to be, and you develop your giftings and your talents, you develop them and you perfect them in a sense, what ends up happening is you start making a difference without even realizing it. That's how you make a difference. You don't need to be prestigious. You don't even have to carry great influence. What you have to be is you. You have to be the person that God intends you to be. And the question to be answered is not, how can we make the biggest difference? That was the question I asked the Lord and myself when I was in my early 20s. How can I make the biggest difference in the world? But the real question is, how can we make the difference that God wants us to make? That's the question we need to ask. How can we make the difference that God wants us to make? Because when you identify the gifts or giftings that God has given you, and you develop these giftings and use these gifts in a loving way to serve other people, to serve God, you will become the difference maker that God has made you to be. You will just automatically be that. Secondly, Jesus said a very interesting thing, that we were to be in the world, but not what? Of the world. We're to be in the world, but not of the world. So don't fret or worry over making a difference in terms of power or wealth or fame. You may achieve some or even all of those things, or you may not achieve any of those things. But if you do achieve them, you'll soon realize that they're simply tools to be used. They're just tools to be used in loving and helping and serving other people. I want to read a verse here in 1 Peter 4:10. Let's read that real quick.
Every believer has received grace gifts, so use them to serve one another as faithful stewards of the many-colored tapestry of God's grace.
Well, so every one of us have received grace gifts. In other words, they're giftings to bring grace and God into other people's lives. So let's use them to serve one another. That's how we can be a faithful steward. Our mission in life should actually be to love people and use things to do that. That's what our mission in life should be, to love people and use things in life to do that. Not to love things and use people to acquire those things. Follow me? Our mission should be to love people and use things, not love things and use people. That is to be the mission of all of us. And the third thing that we can do is we're to make a difference. We're called to make a difference to the things that are right in front of you. A lot of times we have an idea, if I could just go to Uganda, or if I could just go to the Ukraine, I could make a difference. And we miss out on all of the differences that we can make right in front of us. There was an expert in Jewish law who came to Jesus, and he was testing Jesus regarding the second great commandment. There are two great commandments. Remember what they are?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself.
And Jesus said the second is equal to the first. Interesting. We were recently at a gathering where there was a gentleman who wanted to talk to somebody else all about politics and God and everything else. But the people to his right, he never engaged in any conversation with. And they actually needed to experience the love of Christ from this man. But he was all wrapped up in all of this political stuff and discussions and arguing. And I was in the other part of the room, and Jackie and I talked about it and how saddened we were that those four people probably left knowing that he was a church person and he paid zero attention to them. Zero attention. And so in the same sense, there was this expert in Jewish law that came to Jesus, and he was testing him, asking him questions about the second great commandment, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. And we see this story here in Luke chapter 10, verses 30 to 37. I just want to read it real quickly.
So Jesus replied to him, "There was once a Jewish man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho when bandits robbed him along the way. They beat him severely, stripped him naked, and left him half dead. Soon a Jewish priest, walking down the same road, came upon the wounded man. Seeing him from a distance, the priest crossed to the other side of the road and walked right past him, not turning to help him one bit. Then later, a religious man, a Levite, came walking down the same road and likewise crossed to the other side to pass by the wounded man without stopping to help him."
So the Levites were like temple assistants. So you have the priest and the assistant to the priest seeing this wounded guy right in front of them, and they walk to the other side of the road to avoid having to encounter him. Let's go on.
Finally, another man, a Samaritan, came upon the bleeding man and was moved with tender compassion for him. He stooped down and gave him first aid, pouring olive oil on his wounds, disinfecting them with wine and bandaging them to stop the bleeding. Lifting him up, he placed him on his own donkey and brought him to an inn. Then he took him from the donkey and carried him to a room for the night. The next morning, he took his own money from his wallet and gave it to the innkeeper with these words, "Take care of him until I come back from my journey. If it costs more than this, I will repay you when I return." So now, tell me, which one of the three men who saw the wounded man proved to be the true neighbor? The religious scholar responded, "The one who demonstrated kindness and mercy." Jesus said, "Go and do the same as he."
So just to give you a little context here, there was a lot of racial tension in those days between Jews and Samaritans. It was a racial tension. The Samaritans were mixed race people. The Jewish people felt that they were the pure race. And a Samaritan who had been on the receiving end of this kind of prejudice would be probably the most unlikely person to stop and help a Jewish man. Probably the most unlikely. Yet he did. He did. And Jesus said to this law expert, this walking, talking Bible encyclopedia, that's what he was. He was a walking, talking Bible encyclopedia. That's what this Jewish in the law expert was. Yeah, in the Torah.
The Torah.
Yes. And Jesus said to this Bible expert, go become like this Samaritan who you have prejudice against because he comes from a mixed race. Those are the words of Jesus. And what I like about this Samaritan is that he took direct, immediate action. He took direct, immediate action. Let's read what James has to say about that.
So then faith that doesn't involve action is phony.
Wow. Faith that doesn't involve action is phony. How many think phony faith really is no faith at all, right? Phony faith is really no faith at all. And this Samaritan didn't sit down to review all the problems of the world with the people that were passing by. He didn't stop the next group of people that were walking by and saying, boy, that Herod's a bonehead, isn't he? You know, can you believe the decisions he's making? He didn't wonder if there was a greater problem to be solved further down the road. Maybe there's something bigger for me to do down the road. He didn't say that, well, you know, this is really a rural problem and I'm an urban specialist. He didn't say anything like that. He actually didn't even interview the guy that was injured to see, well, what was he doing there at that time of day that he got robbed? Or what had he done to these guys that robbed him that maybe he was culpable for? He didn't actually look in any way, shape, or form to blame the guy that was wounded and beaten up. He didn't try to interview him and find out what he had done to get himself in this circumstance. He simply saw the need.
He didn't judge him.
He didn't judge him. He simply saw the need. And right in front of him, he took action. He took action. I try to be always prepared for the little things that we can do that would become a big thing for people. I always try to carry a little bit of cash in my wallet to help someone who's holding up a sign that says, I'm homeless. I need help. For years, I would see a person like that, and my initial reaction would be, well, get a job. Have you ever done the same thing? The Samaritan saw a need that was right in front of him, and he took action. And sometimes the difference that you are called to make will simply be right there in front of you. Right there in front of you. That's how we can be a difference maker. There's a fourth aspect of being a difference maker that I want to personalize for you this morning. Because you may make a difference that you did not plan to make. You might be able to make a difference in a way that you never imagined that you would make a difference. Sometimes the differences that we make in life turn out to be far different than the difference we intended to make. And nothing could be more closer to the truth than even our story here at Hope Community. Next Sunday will be starting our 27th year as a church. We thank the Lord for his faithfulness to us during that time. Back in 1995, I was asked by the pastor of the church that I was serving on, that Jack and I were serving in, to start a class on raising up people to become part of church plants. He had been asking me to do this for 2 years. And I kept saying, I'm too busy. I got other things that are more important. We have all these other things going on. But in 1995, the spring of 1995, he said to me, you are going to do a class on church planting. So how many understand what it means to be submitted to authority? Right? So I did. And I taught this class for 2 years. Little did I know that 2 years later, that same pastor would ask Jackie and I to be the pastors of the first church plant out of that church, which we said yes to. And we had a band of people, a band of brothers and sisters that had been eating and drinking and sleeping church planting for 2 years with us. And what do you think most of them did? They decided to help us start this church called Hope Community. And so John and Bridget were part of that way back in the day. And so we had this vision. We're going to, build a little building somewhere. We're going to find land and, maybe an acre or two of property, and we're going to build a church. And then we'll have our nice little faith community. But probably in 1990, maybe 1990, 89, somewhere in there, a gentleman had come to our church and had spoken a prophetic word over Jackie and I. And that prophetic word went something like this, and I'll paraphrase. He said, Brian, you and Jackie have seen yourself as a one-man band. You're playing the drum with your foot, and you got a guitar in your hands, and you got a harmonica around your neck, and you use your left foot to do something else, and you're this one-man band, and you're doing really good at that. But this is what God has for you. Turn around. And this big curtain opened up, and there was a 100-piece orchestra there. And what the word to us was you need to lift your vision higher. I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota, just a little country boy, raised in an iron mining town, very little money. And so I never really had too lofty of an ideas, other than I wanted to play the piano like Van Cliburn. I did want to do that. But when Jackie and I met and God called us into the ministry, all that we wanted to do was just serve. Nothing, super big or anything. Just serve people. And that's how we've lived for 50 years. But 27 years ago, God brought us out to this location, and we needed to find a place for the church, and so we started to do prayer drives. And we would drive all around the whole northwest part of the Twin Cities here. And one day we were driving out right in this area, and Jackie said, man, I'm getting really hot. And it wasn't August, And she felt like the Lord said, this is the area we're supposed to be in. And so we started to zero in on the area of Corcoran, and one thing led to another, and the property across the street became available to us, and we acquired it through some really incredible God provisions. And we were ready to build our little church. And when we went before the city, the neighbors in our neighborhood didn't want this little church in their neighborhood. And there was a substantial amount of opposition to us building this little church. How many know that sometimes opposition isn't from the enemy? Sometimes it really is from God. And so, make a long story short, we had permission from the city to build a church, but the council at that time had put 38 conditions on us that virtually made it impossible to build any kind of church that would be sustainable. So we did the only thing most of us know how to do when we have trouble, and that was look to heaven and say, "Help, God." And we began to pray. And after 6 months of praying, I reached out to one of the council members at that time and asked him if I could meet him for lunch, and he said, "Sure." And I was convinced that God had changed the city council's heart so that we could build our little church. And I met with him, and we sat down in the booth at a Panera restaurant, which, by the way, I didn't buy his lunch because that's not legal to do. That's bribery. Okay. I offered to, but he said I couldn't. And the first thing he said to me, Brian, he said, "I don't know what you want to meet with me, Brian, about, but if it's to build a church on the property they have, we're not going to let you do that."
And we had how many acres?
We had 52 acres at the time, but some of it was wetland. But the problem wasn't size. The issue was God was using him. God was using him. And so I did what I didn't want to do. And I said, "Well, can you help me? Tell me what we should do." I didn't like to ask him about that because I was always pretty independent. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, you know. And he took out a map of the city and pointed to this property here. And he said, "Brian, if you can get this property, we'll let you build whatever you want." So I said, "Well, who owns it?" "I don't know." "Well, is it for sale?" "I don't know that either. But if you can get that property, we'll let you build whatever you want." Well, I thought that was a pretty open door, or at least it was the only door that was open. So I went down to City Hall right away, and the gal who was working there, she's now since passed away, her name is Pat Poole. And I walked in, and she had known what was going on with everything and was empathetic to us, really kind to us. And she said, "What can I do for you, Brian?" And I pointed to this property on the map, because there was a map on the counter, a map of the city on the counter, and I pointed to this property, and I said, "Who owns this property?" And she gave me the strangest look, and she said, "Why?" I said, "Well," I mentioned the councilman's name, and I said, "They said if we could buy this property, we could really build whatever we want out here." And she looked at me and she said, "This must be God, Brian." Listen, when a city worker says something like that to you, it gets your attention, doesn't it? Right? I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, the guy that owns that property, people have been trying to buy that property from him for 20 years, and he's not been willing to sell. And he was just in here 20 minutes ago, and he wants to sell for the first time in his life." So where do you think I went from the city hall? I went right to his house, introduced myself. They were wonderful Christian people. They were ready to sell for the first time. Within 5 weeks, we had a purchase agreement signed. And the rest is a little bit like history, except for one thing. We submitted at that time a plan, rather sketchy in a sense, but on that plan it showed senior housing and it showed commercial development and so forth. And the city back in 2001 gave an approval to that. So we've just been waiting and waiting and waiting for city sewer and water to come. All of that took place in 2001. This year, as you notice, the dirt pile outside here and across the street, or the hole across the street, is where the water treatment plant's going to be, and the water tower is going to be on the church site. And we are going to be developing this property probably starting sometime in 2023, 2024. And what the Lord has put on our hearts to do, and what the city seems to be very excited about working with us, is 2 phases of senior housing, 54-row homes, townhomes, for people who can't quite afford the single-family homes, but want to still move to Corcoran. 30 villas for seniors, a multifamily apartment building, 2 of them actually, 2 medical facilities, 2 retail commercial buildings, and an influence of positiveness in our city that when I said yes to starting a church, I had no clue about. No clue about. And the difference that God is allowing us to make here is a lot different than the difference we thought we were going to make. So when the Lord asks you to do something, just say yes. Just say yes to it. Because, we're just a little band of brothers here. We're just a little band of brothers and sisters here. But God is a big God. And He's helped sustain us and provide for us every step of the way. And our heart has always been to serve our city. A lot of churches come into a city and start making demands. We never did that. We wanted to come in and serve our city. We still do. We had a great time last Tuesday night. At the Night to Unite, Jackie served cotton candy. We almost had 3 recreation episodes of I Love Lucy with Jackie doing cotton candy that night.
And Cheryl.
And Cheryl, yeah. And Jeff and others were there helping Pat, and Dan and Cindy and others were there. Angie was there. And so we love to serve. And it's in serving that we can make a difference. I think you had one thing you wanted to say.
Oh, I think it's so beautiful that the church then is the very center of the campus. And all the service and the love and the care and the living that goes on this area will be centered around the church.
Yes. Interestingly enough, probably 20 years ago, there was another gentleman who had a kind of a prophetic picture vision, and he saw hundreds of people coming to this site, like walking across the fields. And of course, at the time, with our limited knowledge, we just kind of thought, well, that's kind of strange, but people are going to be walking here to church. But what God was really showing us was all the people that will be coming to live on this site. Seniors, independent living, assisted living, memory care. They will receive hospice care here. They will receive a place to belong. Our first phase of seniors will even be connected to our church building so that people can go from that building to our building.
Without going outside.
Without going outside in the wintertime. So there's a lot of things that still have to happen, obviously, for all of this to take place. But I'm thankful today that there was a council that had the courage to say no to the things that I was asking them to do. Because God wanted to open up that curtain and show me a 100-piece orchestra rather than a one-man band, So God wants you to make a difference in a way that maybe you don't even plan on making.
But it all starts with saying yes.
But it all starts with saying yes, yes. One more thing, and then we'll get ready to eat some ribs. How's that sound? The 5th thing is this. Little things can actually really make a big difference. We can change another person's life by doing something that is simple, by doing something that is loving, and the impact in that can be incredibly amazing. And I believe that Jesus is calling every single one of us And he's offering us his hand. He always offers his hand when he calls us to do something. And he's encouraging us to step out in faith and make the difference that we were born to make. We were all made by God to make a difference in this world. And we need to continually ask God, how can I make a difference for you? How can I make a difference for you as I'm navigating through this life? And so this story that I want to read, it's not so much, well, let's read it, and then I'll explain what I mean. It's a story of Jesus taking a walk.
At about 4:00 in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the waves.
Yeah, that's where he was walking.
When the disciples saw him walking on top of the water, they were terrified and screamed, "A ghost!" Then Jesus said, "Be brave and don't be afraid. I am here."
How many of you actually need to hear that today from Jesus?
Be brave.
Be brave.
Don't be afraid. I am
I'm
here.
I need to hear that a lot. Yes. I need to hear it a lot.
Peter shouted out, "Lord, if it's really you, then have me join you on the water."
You know, he was really trusting in whatever that was out there. I thought to myself, what if that really was a ghost out there? And the ghost said, "Yeah, come out here." Yeah, you know. But it was Jesus. Yeah, it was Jesus. And he said, "Come on. Hey, join the party, you know."
"Come and join me," Jesus replied. So Peter stepped out onto the water and began to walk toward Jesus.
Just imagine that.
But when he realized how high the waves were, he became frightened and started to sink. "Save me, Lord," he cried out.
How many times have we began to sink because we were afraid?
Yes.
Yeah.
We looked around.
Yeah, we looked at what was happening around us. Remember the story of Elijah and Elisha. And Elisha's request of Elijah was that Elijah would give him a double portion of Elijah's anointing. But there was a caveat to it. He said, "You got to keep your eyes on me." Mm-hmm. And what happened? Man, this fiery chariot shows up, the wind starts blowing, all these sort of things start happening. And it had been real easy for Elisha to start looking at all that stuff. But he kept his eyes fixed on Elijah. And that was a typology for us today, to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. When our eyes can be fixed on Jesus, then we don't look at the surroundings, the circumstances, the situations that seemingly we cannot cope with, that we will never overcome, that we will never be able to get behind us. But rather, let's keep our eyes on Jesus. So let's see what happens here.
All that distracts us,
Yes.
doesn't it? Jesus immediately stretched out his hand and lifted him up and said, "What little faith you have. Why would you let doubt win?"
Isn't that a good line? Why would you let doubt win? Let me tell you something. Doubt is not our friend. Doubt is not our friend. How many lives have been improved by doubting? Of all the disciples, the name Doubting Thomas, that description isn't a positive one, is it? Right? I want Hope Community to be known as a church who truly believes in what God asks us to do. I want you to be the kind of person that believes that God can do what he's asking you to do. Why would you let doubt win?
And the very moment they both stepped into the boat, the raging wind ceased.
Wow. The very moment that Jesus and Peter stepped into the boat, all of this turmoil, all this agitation ceased.
Then all the disciples bowed down before him and worshiped Jesus. They said in adoration, "You are truly the Son of God."
Peter walked on the water when he had faith to walk toward Jesus. Let's walk towards Jesus. And just like Peter, when we have moments of fear, which we all will do, we'll have moments of fear, we'll have doubt. We are subject to the temptations of the enemy. And when he began to have fear and doubt, he began to sink. But Jesus reached out his hand and said, "Take my hand." And when Jesus reaches out his hand to us, let's take his hand. Let's just keep walking towards him. Let's just keep walking towards him. The truth is this: we can't see the whole picture. And that is why we have to step out in faith sometimes. We don't see the whole picture. We have to step out in faith. We don't know where all the pieces fit. You know, how many have put together a 1,000-piece puzzle? And the first thing you do is what?
The edge.
Well, you dump the pieces out, right?
Yes. You sort them.
And you sort them. And
Yes.
I am never going to get this done, right? But you get them all sorted, and then you start looking for the straight pieces, the edges, right? Then you get that edge put together. Then you separate colors into areas and whatever, right? And after a while, with a lot of effort
and patience.
And patience, it comes together. But the fact of the matter is, if all we look at is the pieces, it can seem overwhelming. Sometimes we say, why did these things happen this way? And we see through a mirror darkly, as Paul says. We see real dimly. Did you know that only God has the view from the top of the world? Only God has the view from the top of the world. And these little things that you do for other people that might seem insignificant, when you do them, just think of yourself as reaching your hand out to Jesus and doing what Jesus is asking you to do. You may not see the results of anything that might happen by doing these little things. You might not even see them in your lifetime. Are you okay to do the right thing during the course of your life without seeing the results? We have to be. When Jesus said to do it, then what? Do it. Do it.
Just a little bit over a long period of time makes an impact.
A huge impact.
We've been doing a lot of landscaping, and I found a rock by the barn, and it's got this beautiful hole all the way into it. It's just so amazing, and like a little line that goes down into a hole. And I realized that is just dripping water over years.
I hit that rock.
That has had that kind of impact
right.
on that rock.
Yes. So just like the Samaritan saw something do in front of him, when we do what Jesus puts in front of us to do, what that will do is when we respond, that creates ripples. That creates ripples. And those ripples keep going out. And even if you can't see how far those ripples go, or even see how far those ripples will touch somebody, just keep doing it. I have one more scripture. It's found in James 4:17.
So if you know of an opportunity to do the right thing today, yet you refrain from doing it, you're guilty of sin.
Now, I know none of you want to be sinners. We all want to be saints, don't we? Don't we? I hope so. So James says it this way. So if you know of an opportunity that's in front of you to do the right thing and you refrain from doing it, you're guilty of sin. So just let's remember that. Because I believe in all your hearts you want to be right. Those of you who are watching by live stream, the reason you're watching today is you want to be right. You want to be right with God. And so let's do the little things. And let's let your faith flow into your deeds. Let's not just say we have faith and then we'll just have intellectual discussions with people about God. Let's become God, in a sense. Let's become Jesus. Let's become the hands and feet of Jesus to people. And in doing this, we actually will make a difference.